Hello, Spark fans, and welcome back to Advancing Spark, where today we're having a bumper Databricks News Day. So we didn't bother doing one last month because we had the Data AI Summit, so there's loads of different announcement-y type things going on. But there were a few things that happened on the platform in June, and there's a load of stuff that's happened in the platform in July. Plus, we have the 11.1 Databricks Runtime. So loads of things for us to take a look through. Some exciting stuff, some fairly straightforward stuff, some things going out of support, some things getting some cool new functionality. So we're going to see some interesting things. So Delta Live Tables have got some new stuff, including SED Type 2, which is very cool. Photon going GA has enabled a load more stuff, so you can use Photon in more scenarios. This is just some other things that have come in that I was pleasantly surprised by. But we'll go through it and you'll find out what those are. As always, do not forget to like and subscribe if you're new around here. And yeah, let me know which of these major little features are the ones you actually care about. What is the big news in here? Let me know if I'm skimming over something which is actually fairly big news to you. It's always interesting to find out what people care about. Right, as always, let's go and have a look. Okay, so I'm starting off on the June 2022 release notes. I'm in the Azure flavor of the release notes. There are different ones for AWS and for GCP. Let's go in reverse chronological and start at the bottom. So number one, let's make sure you can see that. So communicating tasks between your Databricks jobs is a biggie. So being able to say, I've run a notebook, and then inside that notebook, I set a parameter. And then I've got a Databricks job that depends on that. I've got a task in my Databricks job that depends on that previous task, and I want to take that parameter and use it. We can now do it. So essentially, you have this little kind of dbutils.jobs.task values to set parameters that can be passed through. So still not talking about kind of big, crazy, dynamic orchestration workflows, but just the ability to chain things and set one thing, use it in subsequent ones, set one thing in a start one, and then run lots of notebooks that all rely on that parameter. You can do that kind of thing now. Crazy, crazy useful. But yeah, just if you're thinking about making your jobs slightly more dynamic, you can now do that a little bit more. When you're editing a Delta Live table, you can now choose whether it's the preview, aka new features, maybe slightly untested, and you've now got a better option of setting that. Fairly straightforward. You've got a button to create new Delta Live tables rather than having to go and dig down into the workflows and find it. You can now just actually, from the create button, go, I want a new Delta Live table or a notebook or things. So it just hooks in slightly nicer. Again, a little UI tweak. It's all good. Delta Live Tables now support STD Type 2. And again, that was a biggie. We've talked a bit about that in some of the Data AI Summit news. So the ability now to actually, when we're saying apply these changes as part of a Delta Live Table step, we can say with STD Type 2, and it'll automatically add in the effective date columns. It'll automatically figure out how to do that stuff, which we have been doing for years, but we've had to just manually reapply that logic each time. Having a button to say, just apply this automatically in the same standard way with the same naming conventions and the same logic, just makes consistency of how we all do this stuff a lot better. So yeah, really nice. I think that deserves its own video at some point in the future. So we'll go and have a look at that at some point. Okay, 10.1 support ends. So if you're on Databricks 10.1, that is already ending. It's already been 6 months since we saw 10.1, which is crazy. Actually, it's now been 7 months because we're in 8 months because we're in August. Big change to Databricks Repos in terms of their default working directory. So if you've got any scripts that are referring directly to something that is living in a Databricks repo, you're reading straight from source control rather than having deployed it into your Databricks workspace, your path for that's going to change. So just be aware that that has changed. Now, you may have found in the past month or so, some of your previous things have just broken if you are referring directly to the path of a notebook. The actual path where it lives in terms of repos, user, repo, path notebook makes a lot more sense. That's fine. But just be aware if you were doing it previously, it might have broken as you moved over. And again, that kind of working directory is a read-only working directory. So if you're trying to write back to that kind of temporary thing, you wouldn't have been able to. Again, the kind of just advice, you should put it in a temp directory if you're doing some local things. I don't know why you really need to be doing that, but just be aware. If you have a use case that requires you to put something down to later pick it up again, and you don't want to just put it in your lake, you can use temp / and I'll put it in a DBFS temp area. All good. Okay, Databricks Runtime 11's GA. Again, we'll talk about 11.1 in a minute. There's some more stuff in there. We've done a video specifically about the Databricks Terraform provider going GA. Again, there's the whole provider has a load of stuff in there. It's not just infra deployment. It's deploy my Databricks workspace and configure my clusters and deploy notebooks and set up some jobs and do all the actual configuration inside your workspace, which means you can just control it all a hell of a lot better than you used to be able to. It used to be generally write a ton of Python scripts that call the CLI. Now we can actually build it in using a full DevOps tool, which is good. There's a new version of the ODBC driver. Now, so if you're connecting to Spark as if it was a SQL endpoint and you're having to use an ODBC driver to do that, you're not using things that have got a built-in one like Power BI, Tableau, etc. Then there's just a slightly new flavor, which allows for more things. One, you can write things as a CTAS syntax, which is interesting. You can override the timeout. So if you were having things time out because you're running too big a query and the ODBC drivers go, nope, timed out, too slow, you can now override it. There's an update to the OpenSSL library, so if you're doing some security things, you can fix that a bit. And there's 2 bugs that were previously unknown. So if you have been hitting any issues with the ODBC driver, take a look at that. But there is also an even newer one in July's release notes. So it could be on 2.6.25 actually when we get to it. 10.1 series support ends, again, just rolling through these normal runtime, just dropping up support. And if you were still using Databricks Runtime 6.4, extended support has finally ran out of support. You really shouldn't be on 6.4 now anyway. That is an ancient runtime, considering we're on 11.1 now. Finally, final change that we had in June. Again, I said there wasn't that many things. A slight tweak to how the permissions model works in Unity Catalog. So previously, if you wanted to be able to do an alter table command to add columns, remove columns, that kind of thing, you need to be the owner of the table, which doesn't really make any sense. Now they've separated that out. So you need to be the owner of the table if you're changing fundamental things about the table, like the table name, overall permissions, modifying definitions, like a view definition if it's a view, things like that. The things that are fundamentally changing the object you need ownership of. Whereas if you're just running a normal kind of alter table and adding comments and kind of renaming things, that's a lower level permission, and you just need that kind of separate thing. So just a slight tweak. If you have to give a ton of people ownership of tables so that they can do things, you can now strip it back and make it a little bit more simple and kind of, you know, consolidate ownership in admin accounts and all that kind of good stuff. Cool. That was June. Honestly, there's loads of other stuff going on in June and loads of announcements and loads of things going on. That is what happened on the platform in June. So let's carry on relentlessly into July. If we go right back down to the bottom again. So, improved notebook visualizations. This is kind of an interesting one. So, you may have seen inside a general Databricks notebook, you can say, I would like a chart, please, and you can put a chart there. But then if you switch over onto the other side and use Databricks SQL, the charting engine's a completely different engine. It's using the Redash visualization stuff. And you've got the interesting thing of being able to do tabs. You can get one output, one data frame result set, and then say, I want to do 5 different visualizations on it. Couldn't really do that in a Databricks notebook. You'd need to actually just basically do 5 Spark actions to return the same result set and then do visualizations on top of it. And that's not efficient. That's not good. Now we can actually sort of use a lot of the same Databricks SQL visualizations inside a Databricks notebook. So just kind of plugged in that same viz renderer, which is great. And also you can now do tab results. So a lot of the stuff that we can do in there, we can kind of do this thing. So you can see that. So we can do on a particular result set, we can just say new visualization and then just start getting a load of tabs in the same way that the data profile things work. And then the visualization that we get is the Databricks SQL visualization editor. So we can go and have a play and we can do all that. And we do have the option of a legacy one if you're used to using the old notebook visualizations. Again, more options. More options of building in analytical tools to our notebooks, which is just great. Generally all good things. We've got the beta for Runtime 11. We'll talk about that because we've also got the GA for it, and we'll dig in and see what's actually included in there. As I said, to give spoilers, we do also have the ODBC driver for 2.6.25. Again, minor change. There's a straggling result file download problem. So it sounds like there was a people were getting a performance bottleneck, and so there's a quite quick release of a new ODBC driver. Don't know much details about it, but again, you might as well be on the most recent one if you're doing that. Also an update to the JDBC driver. So again, ODBC is if you're working through things like Windows and you want to kind of have a straight ODBC connector. If you're in a Java-based environment, you probably need a JDBC connector to go and talk to it. Various different things. If you're on Linux, various things that can do that. At that point, you need the JDBC driver, and there's a new version, which has got some general party updates. Okay, as you can see, it's got the Apache Arrow update. It's got some bugs fixed. there's a few things in there. So again, if you are using the JDBC area, you've been encountering some issues, you can go and have a look and see what that's going to be. Again, I think that was a fairly big one of just having an open connection for a long time. At some point, it just goes, no, I've died. So that should be resolved now. Again, test it out, update your drivers, reinstall that on kind of if it's using JDBC driver, and give it a go and see how it's going. Okay, another one, a minor tweak with Databricks SQL. So we've had this thing called verbose logging. Came in, I think that came in kind of in the May release notes. And that's a switch you can do at the workspace level. That means anytime it's kicking out logs, it's actually going to do the entire command that was submitted inside that cell. So rather than just going, someone's created a notebook, someone's executed the job, and those kind of high-level, kind of workspace level tasks, this is saying, I'm going to actually capture every single command that was sent to the Spark engine. And that's verbose logging, but that didn't capture anything on the Databricks SQL side of things. So this update is just saying, now, Databricks SQL queries also go to verbose logging. So if you're using it, you've got verbose logging turned on, you'll get everything, every cell that anyone ran inside a Databricks notebook, and any SQL query that anyone submitted to a Databricks SQL warehouse endpoint thing. Yeah. Okay. Increase number of jobs in your Databricks workspace. You can now create 10,000 jobs if you want to increase it. So it's just a toggle at your workspace, and you say, I want to have an increased number of Databricks jobs available, and then you can go up to 10,000. Although you do need to make sure you're using the latest version of the jobs API. If you're not on that one, then you'll see it go really slow because it's not used to reading that many job definitions. Which is, yeah, don't necessarily know why you need that many jobs. It kind of feels like you're doing things wrong if you have that many jobs. But I'm sure people have a reason, and they can now actually do it if that's a scale thing they were hitting. Sure. Another little nicety thing. So if you were running a Databricks notebook and you said, right, run all the cells, and then you tabbed off and you went and Googled something, you read the news, you're just doing something else, you've now got browser notifications. So if you want that to pop up going, oh, this is completed, you can go, oh, I'll go back to my Spark tab and I'll go and see the results of my thing. That's something you can now enable. And obviously you'll need to enable that in your browser to say, yes, I do want to allow notifications from Databricks. Again, might be useful. Certainly, I tend to have various tabs open doing various things, so it does make sense. Right, Photon is GA. That's a big statement. Photon is GA, generally available. And now that is not just in the Databricks SQL side of things, that's also Photon in the normal data engineering and data science workspace. So if you're using a normal Spark cluster with Photon enabled, that is now GA. If you're using a Databricks SQL endpoint warehouse thing, that is now also GA to use Photon. There's a few things that came in there. Well, when we look at the Databricks Runtime 11, we will see the GA of Photon also brought in some new vectors, some new kind of operations that can be vectorized, meaning they will actually execute in the Photon engine. So super interesting. We can now go and have a look at that. The other thing on Photon is they have now released the Photon white paper. So there is a deep, dirty technical white paper that explains why they built Photon and how Photon actually works. So we'll do a video doing a deep dive into the white paper very soon, just to talk about how that actually works, which is super interesting. And then finally, we've got the Databricks Runtime 11.1. So let's have a look at what's actually inside here. So number one, as we said, Photon is GA. So that's the biggest news in terms of that. So you need to be using 11.1 for it to actually be using the GA version of Photon. And so essentially the way Photon works is there are pre-built blocks of code, pre-built functions, pre-built kind of vectorized executions that will get called. So they are pre-built in C++ to take advantage of actually sort of that better access to the CPU, better control about how this code is actually running. And what you find is kind of not everything runs on Photon yet. So you'll be running a Spark job, and then you can have a look, certainly in Databricks SQL side, you can go and have a look and see a percentage going, 60% of this query ran in Photon, and the other bits didn't. Now that might be just because it's not really something that could be sped up by the way Photon works, because it was doing vast amounts of reads or whatever it happens to be. Or it might be because they hadn't actually built out support for that kind of operation yet. They hadn't built the vectorized path for that operation. Which is why certain things, so it used to be, if you included the sorts, suddenly that stage would drop out of Photon. So even if there was other operations in there that could be done on the Photon engine, if there was something inside that same kind of group of execution in the stage that couldn't be done in Photon, that would have to be done in the normal Spark engine. So essentially, it will uplift this faster engine when it can, but if it can't, it'll just do it in normal Spark. So it's like a parallel tandem engines where it'll use the fast boosted engine of Photon when it can. So what we're seeing in here, there's a few new vectors that have been added. They've got a vectorized sort operator. So now if you're doing a sort by, cluster by, or order by, then you can actually, it will now hit the Photon engine, which is great. Suddenly that's a load of stages that previously dropped out of Photon or ran a normal Spark engine will now use Photon, and the rest of the things will go faster. There's also new window function support. So a load of those window functions, if you're doing row number, rank, dense rank, all those ones, with any of the various different kind of window boundaries, they are now supported. So they will execute it in Photon. A couple of limitations. So you can't do the sliding frame type. So if you're doing that kind of weird sliding thing to actually create your window boundaries, that no longer works. Well, no longer works. It just doesn't work yet. And it's only the rows version of the frame types. So again, new things coming in, but not everything will. They've called it photonize. Oh, good word, photonize. So always interesting. Always try and run a query, have a look at how it ran, see how much it used Photon. And again, that's the thing, if you go into the execution plan, you'll see big yellow boxes for when it's hitting Photon, blue boxes when it's in the traditional Spark engine. And if everything's a yellow box, you know you're happy and things are just smashing out in the C++ engine, not in the traditional Java Spark engine. Other pieces, only certain machine types support Photon, so you'll need to make sure they are supported instances. It's all good. And then we've got a bunch of other changes that are coming in with that Databricks 11.1 runtime. So change data feeds. So if you're using the change data feed in Delta, remember that's that thing that essentially automatically captures updates and kind of inserts separately. So you can say, query that table, just tell me what's changed and what changed about it. And you'll get that back rather than having to work that out yourself by taking big whole reads of the data. That's really good. But it always used to error if you asked for a date past the last checkpoint of that table. So if someone had just updated the table and you went, tell me the result set out of now, you go, there's no now, that's outside of the range. What are you talking about? We can now do that. So now a config that we can set. So just allow me to query things that are outside of the range of my transaction log, and it'll just handle it, which I think it always should have done, but it's just a good option to have. Makes sense. Unity catalog naming. So a lot of the metadata operations of those describe table, database, schema, namespace, all that kind of stuff didn't always give the three-part naming of Unity catalog name. So catalog name dot database / schema name dot table name. That three-part naming is now consistent. So now you're going to see that. You're going to see the catalog name in all these things when we're actually pulling it back, which is just good. And then the one that I'm so excited for. It's depressing how excited I am for this change. But you can now do schema inference and evolution on Parquet. And this is just an argument I've had with so many people because I love schema evolution. As a lake builder, as a lake house builder, I spend a lot of time explaining to people why, if they're pulling from a database source, if they have a relational structure that is nicely managed and data typed and all that kind of stuff, my preferred method currently, before this, is to suck all the data out and land it as JSON in some kind of intermediate landing blob. And I can read from those JSON files using autoloader into the first layer of my lake, my raw layer, my bronze layer, call it what you will. And I can do schema evolution because it is JSON. That means I can say, well, actually, no, the structure's changed. No, your database table has an extra column. Someone's changed the data types. So if data change, if the structure of your relational structure changes, I can use JSON to manage that. But that's always been a contentious point. Because you have people going, well, no, because my data's structured. Why would I take structured data and then remove the structure so you can reapply the structure? I'm losing accuracy. I'm redoing the work. And it's always a hard argument because essentially, yes, you are. Surely so you can do schema inference and schema evolution. I was like, if I could do it over Parquet, I would do it over Parquet. If I could land it from the database as a structured file type that has its own actual good structured elements, and then evaluate that and go, does the structure of that structured file, Parquet, match my expected structure? If not, do things like a rescue column, do things like evolving schemas. It would be fantastic. Well, that's what this is. That's why I'm so happy. So it means that actually that argument is no longer an argument. If you're loading from a structured source, you can land it as Parquet, maintain some of the good accuracy about that data structure, and then still get the benefits of schema evolution, schema inference. So actually that might change our entire recommended reference architecture for what to do with that intermediate landing layer. Great. Hence why I'm quite excited about that particular release. It makes me happy. Cool. So that's one thing. We've got dynamic partition overrides. Now, this is an interesting one. So essentially, if we're doing things like, so coming from a database world, I've had to do things like partition swaps so many times. So if I'm getting a load of data in and I've rebuilt what that month looks like, and then rather than doing a merge onto the existing month and having to compare record by record, I'm like, well, no, just get rid of the existing month, replace it with this new version of that month. And that is way faster. It's a metadata operation as opposed to a giant lookup merge statement. And to do that, we use the thing called replace where. Replace where is a thing inside Databricks, or inside Spark, where you've got to write to a delta table, and you want to say explicitly, I want you to take these 1 to 10, whatever partitions, and replace it with this incoming data set into those partitions. So it's like a selective, slightly hard-coded partition switch. Now, obviously, we generate the string of partitions it's replacing dynamically, so it's not actually hard-coded, but we just have to inject into that function, here's a list of partitions to switch into. This is replacing them, kind of. So we've now got this partition overwrite mode that we can set into dynamic. So we're doing dataframe.write.mode.overwrite, rather than just trashing everything that's in there, including all partitions, and replacing with our new data frame. It will just replace any partition set it finds. Now, a little bit dangerous, because if we had just one record that had changed in a whole of a partition, that's going to get rid of that existing partition and replace it by one record. So we need to be careful to know that any data coming in is a whole replacement for an existing partition, but we don't need to explicitly say, it's these partitions I'm going to get rid of. So it's an interesting one. Essentially, it's going back to those. We generally have two paths of how we update a delta table. Either we do a merge, or if merge is too slow because actually we're updating every single record in there, we do a replace where. It's now just an option saying, well, okay, we can get rid of replace where, replace it with dynamic partition overrides, as long as we are comfortable with the fact that any partition we're overwriting it with the full up-to-date version of that partition. There is a note in here actually that says, you can't use them both. So you can't enable dynamic partition overrides and try and use replace where. They are side by side, slightly different methods of doing the same thing. You can't try and use both together because they're conflicting. So yeah, pick which one makes sense to you. But it's nice that we've got this additional option for trying to do this kind of some dynamic writing of partitions. Again, lots of little things coming in 11.1. I like it. Okay, you've got an information schema support. So if you're actually sort of if you're trying to pull back information from the SQL API to understand objects in the Unity catalog, you can now do that, which is good. Essentially, it's about like a system, like if you're in like a SQL server and use like sys.tables, sys.catalog, all that kind of stuff, you can now actually just go and get information from the information schema within there. So just understanding what relationships have I got. A good data modeling in a lakehouse. I like it. You know, all these different informational schemas saying, what are all the columns? What are all the constraints? What are all the joins I've got? So all the information that you can actually build up by putting in things like primary key references, foreign key references, which you can now do inside Delta tables, save that all into Unity catalog, and then you've now got an information schema. So you can go and pull out information about your data model from Unity catalog, which is great. Again, love to see good ERDs. Oh, entity relationship diagrams. Who doesn't love a bit of that brought into the Lake world? It's always good. Informational constraints. Again, things like being primary keys, foreign keys, building out joins. Exactly that. Things that are going to then go and populate and be queryable via that, the information schema. Just good extra metadata to give information. So it's not enforcing things. It's not saying there's going to be referential integrity to that foreign key. It's not going and checking and going, wait, you've done a link and then instead of the record, that doesn't exist over there. It's just more saying, if I want to if I want to understand what's going on, if my users want to query the data model, they can look at that table and then see that there's things marked as foreign keys and see what those relationships are. Purely informational, but you could use it to build out data models automatically and suck it out into other BI tools and use that to actually infer actual model you can build, which is great. I'm hoping eventually things like the Power BI connector will just automatically do that. Go, select connected tables, and it'll bring back all the connected tables and actually build a data model for you based on your informational constraints, which is great. Finally, quick one. If you're doing describe tables and show table properties, if there's anything that is marked as sensitive, it's not going to show you it, which just makes sense. So that's a slight change if you're using that. And then the usual pile of library upgrades and Spark bugs and all the things that have gone in there. What? Ton of stuff going on. And it kind of feels a bit of a shame that, we've got all these platform announcements and there's a few nice things in there. But actually, Runtime 11.1 just has a whole world of new stuff in there. I'm very excited, as you can probably tell, about being able to do schema inference and evolution with Parquet. That is a big thing for me. Shouldn't be a big thing. That's my life these days. But it is what it is. One final little thing I want to do, a little sneak peek to news that we're going to talk about in the August thing, is serverless SQL warehouses. So we talked about Databricks SQL serverless for quite some time, and it's been it's coming soon. Oh, you're going to see it soon. It's going to come, and now we've got it. So you should be able to use it in public preview. So be aware, it is in public preview. It is not yet full enterprise grade support SLAs. Use it in anger in production or any of that kind of stuff. But you can go and have a play with it. So this is essentially using Databricks SQL, but not having to have an endpoint stood up that you have to click a button and wait for the Spark cluster to start. Then you can write your queries and have to worry about how long it's turned on for. This is going after the same kind of run a query. The first query takes a few seconds to start up, and then there's a Spark cluster ready to talk to you. So all information about actually how fast does it go? How does it charge you? How does it work in things like VNets? Loads of things we need to dig into and we need to understand. But the fact you can now go and have a play with it, you can enable it on your workspace, and you can start playing with Databricks SQL Serverless is very, very cool. And yes, I will do a video doing the first look at Databricks SQL Serverless, and we can all see how it goes. Whoa! Okay. There we go. That's my giant bumper pile of updates for June and July 2022, including a little sneak peek of what's going on in August. And there's just a lot of stuff in there. Now, obviously, you've seen I've got quite excited about some of those features. I'd love to know if there's any of those features that you guys are excited about. If you're looking at that going, no, wait, you just scrolled past that. That is huge for us. That fixes a major issue we've been having. Let me know down in the comments. It's always interesting to know actually what you guys really actually care about. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.